Let me just acknowledge that. Whereas anxiety is thought to be a response to a danger that has a personal component, right, is laden with a sense of subjective meaning, which is why we don't all respond to the same dangers in the same way. Hi, come on in, nice to see you. And it's also why certain triggers for anxiety can be very gripping, depending on what we bring from our history to that current trigger. And other triggers can seem rather manageable, right? Fairly benign if it's something that we might have experienced, but was actually not so personally problematic. Yeah, fear and anxiety. And so tonight, we're going to take a little bit of time to talk about how to work with fear, so that we're less susceptible to getting locked into it, right? Because again, like all feelings, it's necessary. It's got an important function. It's in the service of offering protection. But if we have a tendency to feel fear and then get gripped by it, or really struggle to recover so that the nervous system is quite activated, it can take a lot out of us, right? It can take a lot out of the body, and it can take a lot out of the mind. And so what I'd love to do tonight is just briefly touch into some of the teachings that we find in the Buddhist tradition, and also think together about the psychological nutrients in those teachings. And so I thought what we could do is start with a central prayer, the refuge and bodhicitta prayer, which in the Tibetan tradition, we recite before any practice, right? Even a very simple 5-minute breath practice. First, we would recite the refuge and bodhicitta prayer. And to me, it seems directly relevant to our experience of fear. In part because, as we were talking about last Friday, when we're afraid, we have to find some way to cope, right? I mean, that's what the mind will do. It's going to start searching for resources. And as we talked about, many of us will find resources where we feel like we can take refuge, right? We can go into whatever it is we're seeking in order to get a break from the source of the fear. It's just that so often where we go for refuge offers us a too fleeting respite from the fear. And we like it. It feels good because suddenly the fear is offline. But that, of course, becomes a little bit of a setup for that grasping impulse. We want more. I got relief for half an hour. How about extending it to an hour? How about making it last all night? Right? We get hooked. The Buddha Shakyamuni said, this is very human, right? We all have that grasping impulse. We all have that search for well-being. It's just sometimes we end up confusing reliable sources of well-being with very fleeting temporary sources that eventually cause distress and frustration and suffering, because we can feel we're getting hooked by something that isn't quite working. All right. It works for a while, it works in certain ways, but it doesn't actually allow for that ongoing sense of relative safety, right? Relative well-being, a sense of decompression. Yeah. So on that note, Sneh, if you would be so kind to bring up the refuge and bodhicitta prayer so we can all have a look. Okay, wonderful, thank you. So for those of you who have been practicing for some time, you're very familiar with this prayer, right? In this translation, says, I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. And we recite that 3 times. There are different translations. Often it's something along the lines of, in the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, I take refuge until enlightenment is reached. Through the merits of giving and other virtuous deeds, may I attain Buddhahood for the benefit of all beings. And so the first part of the prayer is the process of taking refuge. And for the record, you don't have to be a card-carrying Buddhist. You do not have to have taken vows to work with this prayer. It's for anybody. And I would say, well, traditionally, the idea is that we go to particular mentors, right, and particular teachings. I invite you to think about any mentor, in any religious tradition, or it could be an artistic tradition, where you have had some sense of somebody else's spacious mind, somebody's open, present mind being available to you. And maybe even just to take a few moments to, if you have had that experience, right, to call them to mind. And notice, right, notice what happens to your nervous system as you start to evoke that resource. In the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. So Buddha meaning the mentor who has been committed to their own healing, right, is making the decision that life is going to be about working deeply and with steadfast determination with their own mind and heart. And so it's interesting to consider that this is so emphasized in Buddhist psychology, right? We need a mentor. It's equally emphasized in Western psychoanalytic and psychotherapeutic tradition that we are entirely dependent upon others. That's the nature of the human experience. And as we touched on a little bit last week, that's how we begin this journey, in total dependence upon another. We remain totally dependent on others throughout this life, although as Sheila and I were discussing, it can be easy for a while to start to imagine we don't need others in quite the same way we once did. If the body seems to be working reasonably well and the mind is functional, then sometimes there's this sense of independence of, I'm good, I can handle this. But that experience gets really challenged as soon as there's distress, right? As soon as there's some feeling of being in some way unsafe. This has something to do with our attachment system, right? We all develop an attachment style, dynamic with another. And we all need some sense of another person or community, and thus the reference to Sangha, being there as a safe harbor. When whatever it is we're facing, and we're focusing on fear here. So whatever we're facing that feels a little unsafe, feels threatening in some way, that there's the sense of somebody else's mind being available to help us hold it. Right? So that we're actually taking refuge in the mind of the other. Sometimes it feels like we're taking refuge in something more concrete, right? We're going to take refuge in the other person's apartment or their bank account or their culinary capacity, whatever it is. And sometimes we do need those concrete forms of support. But really, right, the ultimate source of refuge is somebody else's loving, spacious, open, present mind. Yeah. And so in the Buddhist tradition, and interestingly, also in the psychotherapeutic tradition, there is this notion that that's a reliable source of refuge. Now, it doesn't mean that we still don't need to nurture our own spacious mind that can find its way back to a sense of being oriented, right, and relatively clear. We do, but that's really what the mentor is for. First, to help hold our mind before we're able to hold our mind on our own. And then slowly to basically convey to us that we have the internal resources that we need to be able to do that holding. Yeah. It's just that in my experience, there's a lot of forgetting that happens about those inner resources. And depending on the magnitude of stress we are dealing with, probably we will always need somebody else's mind that's available to us. And not someone who needs to tell us what to do or to do the thinking for us. Right? I mean, to use clinical jargon, we don't need people to mentalize for us. We need people whose minds are present to say, I'm here, kind of like an open house. You know, I'm here, come on in, have a look around. You can notice how I'm holding what you're holding, but really I'm here accompanying you to see if together we can't find your wisdom, your intuition, your clarity, your sense of what you need. Yeah. And I will say, as a clinician, I find this teaching to be really invaluable, because I really believe that everyone does have deep, intuitive knowing and wisdom. It just gets camouflaged by the experience of fear and by the doubts that come with fear and the anger that can sometimes also come with fear. And so part of what a good enough mentor is going to try to do is say, I actually see that you have more going on internally than you realize. You have so much more insight, so much more intelligence, so much more sensitivity. Let's see if we can't find it. And then when we do, then let's be curious about what you sense you need. Yeah. So taking refuge in the Buddha, right? right? Taking refuge in a mentor. Now, the relational theme is, again, really emphasized in this prayer because it goes on to say, right, we take refuge also in the Sangha, which is basically community. And I have been so fascinated by this prayer throughout my life because I've noticed when I start to get a lot of distance from community, I can really lose touch with my own Buddha nature. There is, I think, a need for that reflection. We do seem to need others to reflect in us the truth of who we are. And I think to be a true holding environment, right? I've heard from a lot of people throughout the years that they really want to cultivate a practice. They're really interested in the teachings. They resonate with the teachings, but they have a very hard time doing it on their own. It's very hard. It's very hard, right? I mean, we need inspiration from mentors and from loving, inclusive, welcoming, supportive, compassionate community. Yeah. And of course, we all know it. I mean, we've been through a lot in recent years where we had to isolate. And we also know that with technology, many of us are more prone to isolation than we used to be because there's nothing more fun than the phone. I mean, there's nothing more immediately fulfilling than the device. So we're going for refuge to the phone. But it turns out we really need community. All right. And it's so interesting. I mean, we're wired for that experience, right? Our nervous system needs to feel that we're with other people and we're in sync, right? And they can help, their nervous system can help regulate our nervous system. So we take refuge in the Buddha, we take refuge in the Sangha and loving community. And then we take refuge in the Dharma, right? In the path and the teachings. And this is also such a powerful prayer, right? Because it's a reminder that we are always in a learning process. And I was saying to someone earlier today that these teachings, they are so profound, but they're also very elusive. I mean, it's amazing to me. I mean, I've been looking at and reciting these prayers now for about half a century, and still every time I think, wow, go to refuge to the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha until enlightenment is reached. What the heck? What is happening? I mean, there's something extraordinary about the teachings. And I think that's a sign of any teaching that has real value is going to have that elusive quality. It's like the mind just needs to keep revisiting. Right? In a way, it's like nourishing food. I mean, sadly, we can't just have one salad and then hope it's going to work for the rest of our life, right? Or one bowl of steamed kale or collards or whatever you like. We have to keep eating it. Sometimes that's annoying. Yeah. To keep drinking the water, keep making the green tea, right? We keep going for refuge again and again. Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. And so in this case, with the Dharma, we just keep exploring the teachings, and we have now, right, thousands of years of teachings and commentaries, and so many spiritual friends who can help us just keep reflecting on the nature of these teachings. And I would add the profound optimism in the teachings, right? And in this tradition, it's suggested that we're all by our nature a Buddha, right? That's just the deepest layer of mind, place of clarity, and place of clear seeing. We just have to work out all the layers on top, right? All the cloud coverage. But all these teachings can help us access that clarity and begin to nurture awareness of it so that it's more available throughout our life. Now, in the spirit of time, I'm going to move on so that I can touch on bodhicitta, which is the second part of the prayer, right? And so traditionally, I take refuge in the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha until enlightenment is reached. Through the merits of giving and other virtuous deeds, may I attain Buddhahood for the benefit of all, right? That's bodhicitta. That wish to do that deep inner work, not only because it brings us relief, and hopefully it will, and that's a good thing, right? If fear is the struggle or anxiety, right, when we do this deeper dive, it can bring tremendous personal relief. But the bodhicitta vow is orienting all of this exploration, all of this study, all of this practice toward the entire collective, the entire human family, and everyone in it, indiscriminately. Yeah. So it's a tall order, but the beauty of it, and I want to suggest its relevance to working through fear, is that when we touch into bodhicitta, we are actually coming out of our mental sense of isolation, right? I mean, sometimes when we sit down to meditate, it's because we're a little freaked out, we're stressed. We're going through something that's really arduous, or we're getting ready for something that feels overwhelming. And so there is usually some sense of, I'm dealing with a lot, right? And that can feel actually isolating, right? That sense of I. It's not a bad thing, right? I mean, we have personhood, so we need to care about what we're going through. But the bodhicitta prayer is a beautiful reminder. We might feel isolated, but actually we are in this totally embedded system, right? I mean, our brain chemistry is changing now as we're in the space together, right? Our bodies are changing because of the air we breathe, right? Everything about us is embedded relationally. And so while it can seem like a really tall order and sometimes a little grandiose, right? May I become a Buddha for the benefit of all. It's a beautiful challenge to that sense of isolation that is often an agent for fear. Yeah. I've used this example before, but sometimes I'm really struck by, and we have lots of experiences like this in New York City, where I'm going through something and it's not easy, but then suddenly I'm in line somewhere at the post office or the supermarket, and the line is taking a long time and people are getting agitated. We're all looking at our phones. Yeah. But then sometimes I'll turn around and I'll just commune with the person behind me, and we'll roll our eyes. And maybe one person will say, I don't know, we might be here all day. It makes everything better, right? I mean, those moments are pure dharma, because the external difficulty has not changed, right? It's exactly the same. But suddenly there's a feeling of solidarity. Right? Suddenly there's that felt sense, and it is somatic as well as psychological and spiritual. Oh, I'm in this with other people. Yeah. So when we get into the habit, and you don't have to take bodhisattva vows to just be curious about bodhicitta or to recite the bodhicitta prayer, you can just notice how it offers some comfort to keep orienting toward what you're doing and its connection to others. Right? Yeah. I mean, every time you sit and you just work with the breath for a couple of minutes, or you read something that's spiritually nourishing, it's going to have ripple effects. Right? And even if it's subtle, it's probably going to have some healing ripple effects. Right? It will change your state of mind, and then how you're feeling about yourself and how you're interacting with others will similarly change. Yeah. So may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. Okay. So we could spend the next several months just exploring the refuge and bodhicitta prayer. But again, I wanna also now think through the four immeasurables, or the Brahmaviharas, because they are also very, very powerful antidotes to fear. And again, in the Tibetan tradition, before any practice, after reciting the refuge and bodhicitta prayer, then we'd recite the four immeasurables. And these are thought to be four qualities that we just can't get enough of, right? These are four psychospiritual food groups that we can just keep taking in, because they're going to offer ongoing nourishment. And I'll say just a few words about how we can work with them in relationship to fear. And then I'd love to hear from you to see how this is sounding. So the first immeasurable, right? May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. Yeah. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. It feels good, right? Just to say it, right? I mean, since we're, as my teacher is always reminding us, we're praying for things all the time anyway. Why not pray for something, right? Why not have a wish that might usher in some well-being? And so from a Buddhist perspective, this wish for happiness, right? And this includes the wish for our own happiness, is an expression of love, right? This is loving kindness. Yeah. And I've been very interested in love, like all of you, right? What's love got to do with it? I've been thinking about what love is and why it's so compelling. And I've really appreciated this Buddhist understanding of love as the wish for someone's happiness. And it makes sense to me. I mean, I started to review, does that resonate with me? And I think it really does. That when I'm in touch with love for another person, I so want them to have the conditions that are going to help them feel genuinely happy. That's going to make me happy. I'm not secretly worried that they're going to have more happiness than I have. Right, that can come up. We'll get to that with sympathetic joy. There is that genuine sense of, please, yes, let yourself go for the thing, the experience that you're longing for. I want that for you. Yeah. And I will admit, I do sometimes watch the shows where there is a loved one who is observing the candidate or the competitor. And I just love seeing that when the candidate or the competitor is doing well or they're receiving affirmation, the loved one is crying. They're jumping up for joy. They are so thrilled. I love that. That's right, that's love. And many psychologists would suggest, and lots of Dharma teachers would suggest, that love really is a very effective antidote to fear. Right? When we're feeling loved, the fear starts to settle. Right? It really is a holding environment. Yeah. And so with this prayer, right, may all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness, we basically get into the habit of inculcating the mind in that wish. Right? May I and all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. It's a real improvement from, I hope I don't freak out, or I hope I don't get hit by the bus, whatever it is, right? We're really stretching that capacity to touch into that love. And then, right, reciting that, thinking about it, considering it every day, so that it doesn't seem like an elusive fantasy. Yeah. It's important, I think, right? Especially as we go through times when there's so much struggle, so much fear. If we can actively nurture that state of mind that's loving, then we have a way of coming out of the fear, and we have a way of being present for others so that they too can come out of the fear. Yeah. So loving kindness, right? This is the first immeasurable. And then the second one is, many of you know, been practicing for some time, is compassion. Right? May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. And so, right, love is the wish for people to be happy, to have what helps them be happy. And compassion is the wish for people to be free from whatever it is that causes the suffering, the difficulties, the struggles. And it sounds so logical, right? It seems like if we saw suffering, whether it's our own or somebody else's, that of course, that's what we would want, and we would want it to be a conscious process. right? May you have health, may you have support, may you have a safe home, may you have good friends, may you have access to food that you enjoy that works for your body, right? May you have work that you find fulfilling and meaningful, right? May you live in a community where there's no war, right? May you walk the streets and feel respected and safe, all of it. It's just that so often our protective system gets in the way. And we don't even like the mind getting that close to suffering. We don't want to think about it, right? And so while this sounds like such a logical prayer, may all beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering, it actually, for many people, does take some practice and some courage to risk bringing the mind a little bit closer to the suffering, right? I mean, this is why not everybody can access compassion that readily, because they're so in the habit of, of thwarting awareness of suffering, not letting the mind go there. Or it can go to certain forms of suffering, but not other forms of suffering. And probably everybody here has had some experience where there was some real personal suffering, and you're dealing with someone who won't see it. They will not acknowledge it, right? They will not give you the gift of that recognition. That becomes another form of suffering. So this is a very deep practice, right? And it is a super effective way of mitigating fear. Because if we are suffering from fear, right, which means we are dealing with something that's threatening or dangerous, and we can access some self-compassion, then it creates a way of holding the experience with some gentleness. It's almost like it creates a better space, right? A roomier space for what's going on. And it can also take us out of the experience of just being gripped, right? Because if we're feeling genuine self-compassion, it means we're no longer in a state of survival. We're not in a reactive mode. We're in a receptive state of mind that's willing to see the suffering, even to feel it, but with a little tenderness and respect and response. And again, it's really so interesting how the external trigger might remain the same, right? And we were talking about bodies earlier and illness. We might all know the experience of dealing with illness. And in one moment, there's a sense of, this can't be happening. How much worse is it going to get? What am I going to be facing? Who's going to be there? Right? The fear can become very pronounced. But when we can shift into that softer, more tender state of, this is hard. Right? This is not that easy to have a body that is fragile and prone to illness. It allows the nervous system to access a little bit of decompression, a little bit of safety, right? And then if we can do that for ourselves, then we start to learn to do it for others. which does require yet more courage, right? Because it means we're going to be opening to more suffering without getting consumed by it, right? Without getting gripped. This is why people often resist compassion, because there's fear. I open myself to your suffering, and then there's no turning back. I'm stuck there. But part of why we need mentors and sangha and teachings is so that we don't have to do that. We can open the mind, we can see the suffering, we can care, but without losing our own internal resource and well-being. Yeah. Okay. So, compassion. May all beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. Again, there's a lot to say about compassion, and especially the complexity of self-compassion. But in the spirit of time, I want to touch on the next immeasurable, right? Mudita, or sympathetic joy. This is also such a powerful and elusive teaching. Right? May all sentient beings never be separated from the happiness that knows no suffering. Sometimes this is translated as, may all sentient beings know joy beyond suffering, which is, it's a little bit of a koan. What is that? Joy beyond suffering. But this teaching is it's a fascinating challenge to that tendency to feel separate from others so that other people's joy can become something that we envy rather than something we feel we're participating in. Right? So in the game shows, the loved one who's observing the person who's having a good night, right? They're not thinking, huh, this sucks because I didn't follow my dream. They're having a great night. No, right? They're both in the joy, sympathetic joy. This is a wonderful way of softening feelings of isolation and the illusion of isolation. Because it's true, right? If anyone here is accessing something that allows you to feel some joy, allows you to enjoy your life, it can only be helpful for everyone else. Right? It can only help you feel like, I can manage life. Life is all right. Life is worth it. And that, of course, is going to inform the way you are with others, the way you are in the world. And so in this teaching, we're starting to challenge that habituated tendency to be jealous of someone else's joy and maybe even to envy it. Right? And there's no shame in it. I mean, this is very human, right? Especially if there's something that you have needed and wanted and it just feels so elusive and it feels like everybody else is getting it. Why do I have to keep waiting so long? I thought I was a good person. I've been going along, doing decent things. So there's no shame. There's no shame in the jealousy. But with this immeasurable, right? We're just beginning to notice what would it be like to practice that sense of joy in response to other people's joy. And when it comes to fear, once again, it's going to help the amygdala settle, right? We're going to be touching into a physiological sense of connection. If your joy is helping me feel good, then suddenly I'm not so freaked out. right? I'm not so gripped by the fear of whatever it is I'm dealing with or the frustration that is ongoing. All of that starts to settle. So it's such a smart prayer, right? Yeah. May all sentient beings never be separated from the happiness that knows no suffering. Yeah, mudita. So I just offer the possibility of enjoying the prayers, right, to whatever extent you want to or you can. And if you are working with something that causes fear, just to notice what happens to the fear when you touch into this immeasurable, right? Does it settle temporarily? Right? Does it find some relief? Because again, you're going to be in the same way with bodhicitta, mentally feeling more connected to others. And as soon as we do, right, fear is going to settle. It may not disappear depending on what's going on, but it's not going to have the same grip that it has when we feel that sense of radical isolation. Okay, lastly, and then I would love to hear from all of you, we have the teaching of equanimity. Yeah, may all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free of attachment and aversion or hatred for those held close and distant. So this is another really challenging teaching and prayer, because it has a few components that are directly related to fear. One is our general state of mind, right? That state of equanimity where we're less susceptible to being extremely labile, right? We're less susceptible to extreme highs and extreme lows, because the mind has gotten a little bit accustomed to finding some steadiness, right? Some spaciousness. And for those of you who have been practicing for a while, you know that it really helps to feel like you can access some steadiness, because as we know, we have no control over anything in our life externally. We have a lot of internal control. That's really all we can do, is work deeply with the mind and see what it's like to nurture that steadiness, that spaciousness, so that whatever it is we're facing externally can be dealt with a little more patience and skill, a little more clarity. So that's one primary component of equanimity. And the other, which is identified pretty explicitly in the prayer, is also our habituated customary biases, right? We want to grasp onto certain people and never let them go. Stay close because you help me feel safe, and I like the way I feel when I'm near you. Right, so there's the edge of attachment, because again, we don't have the control that we might wish we had in order to garner that closeness. We can hope for the best, but we can't ultimately know how close we can stay to another human being. And then, as we know, we also can feel a lot of aversion, hatred, right, toward anyone or toward any group that seems to cause us suffering. And again, this is human because it's about protection. But when the mind gets gripped in that cycle of grasping and aversion, then it makes it impossible to actually rest in that steadiness of a spacious mind. We're just never hanging out there. We're swinging usually back and forth between I feel good now because you're here. And now I feel awful because you're here. Right? And I'm gonna be okay as soon as I can get distance. It's very tough. It's a very tough way to live. And I mean, we're laughing because we've all probably had countless experiences where there is the fantasy of there's somebody who's gonna usher in safety and well-being, and I just have to do everything possible to hold on. And then sometimes with that same person, there are problems. There are unforeseen conflicts, and then aversion. I need you to go away because I cannot feel well with the proximity. And so the Buddha and all the teachers who followed said, well, look, this is all very normal stuff, and psychotherapists focus a lot on this cycle, right? It's often some struggle with attachment and aversion that brings people into treatment. But in the Buddhist tradition and in the psychotherapeutic tradition, there are ways to, again, try to step out of that cycling, right, between attachment and aversion, and come into a more reflective space in the mind. And it does feel good. You've probably all had experiences, again, where you go from really just feeling completely riled or gripped, either by the desire or the aversion, to somehow getting a little bit of psychic distance so that you can see what's going on. Oh, I thought this person was going to be my ideal friend for my entire life, and I trusted them completely, and I trusted them to be there for me in every way imaginable until they couldn't be, because they have a limitation I couldn't see, or there's a limitation in our dynamic that I couldn't see, or my longing for that care overtook the reality of what's on offer. And then there's more room in the mind to just be curious, just notice, without having to fix anything, right? You don't necessarily have to solve the problem so much as with equanimity to come back into that spacious layer of the mind. And from both a Buddhist and a psychotherapeutic point of view, when we do that, we have a much better chance of actually working through what's contributing to our attachments and our experience of aversion. Because now there's compassion online, there's intelligence online, right? There's care online. And it resources us to work through some of these challenges. May all sentient beings remain in equanimity, free from attachment and aversion toward those near and far, for the benefit of all. Okay, so on that note, Sneh, if you can maybe stop the screen share so that I can see everybody. Hi. And I'd love to just check in now to see how this is sounding, see if there are any questions or reflections. And in our Zoom Sangha, you can raise your hand the old-fashioned way if you want to. Okay, and I don't have my glasses. Is it Natalia? Hi, Natalia.
Hi, Pilar. Thank you for these sessions. I'm curious. I can't reconcile, and I wonder how you do it, between the psychotherapeutic tradition and Buddhist tradition. There seems to be a conflict. For example, you haven't talked about it, but the teaching of emptiness teaches that we should let go of all the emotions, especially anger or fear. And in psychotherapeutic tradition, of course, there are important signals to pay attention to. So how do you not dismiss one or the other, and how do you accept both?
Yeah, thank you, Natalia. Yeah, it's a wonderful question. And if we had another session, I would definitely want to explore the wisdom teachings and the teaching of emptiness as a way of working with fear. Because there is, as you're pointing out, there's a lively tension between the two traditions around affect, right? And there isn't actually a conflict, although, I mean, if you read Shantideva, for instance, what you will hear is that anger is by its nature problematic. You won't hear that in the tantras, so it's not actually woven into Buddhist psychology, but you will notice a tension. Because as you're pointing out, Natalia, in the psychotherapeutic tradition, we are really encouraged to be deeply curious about our feelings. Right? This is why therapists ask the annoying question, and how do you feel? And how are you feeling about that? Again and again, it's like a mantra, right? The idea is that our feelings usually are a portal into deeper, often embodied experience and knowing. Bless you. And we need to be able to access feelings in order to have direct experience. And if we cannot, then we're going to end up a little bit disconnected, right? A little split, a little schizoidal, to use a clinical term. It's one of the reasons why clinicians are always harping on feelings, so that we can come back into our direct experience. Now, of course, there's a risk. We can get stuck in certain feelings. We can get flooded by certain feelings. Right? Some people are prone to rage reactions, so they're dealing with a threat, right? They're ready to fight. Other people, they're prone to terror or anxiety, despair, you name it. And so the wisdom teachings can come in as a really effective way of holding the whole realm of affect, that as powerful and as challenging as all of our feelings can be, they do not have any permanent abiding characteristic. They are empty too, right? They arise, we feel them, we get knocked around by them. And then if we're actually metabolizing them, right, we're letting ourselves identify the feeling and recover from the feeling, excuse me, the feelings will settle. I mean, it's actually kind of amazing how many feelings we can experience in the course of a day or an afternoon, right? And so the wisdom teachings come in to say we get too identified with our feelings. Clinicians will also emphasize that. right? If we have a history of dealing with a lot of fear or depression or anger, then often it starts to feel like part of oneself, part of personhood, and not a dynamic fluid arising in the mind. And so actually, I think the teachings work really beautifully around feelings when you bring this understanding of emptiness, which again, it doesn't mean there isn't reality. It just means that it's totally embedded in all sorts of causes and conditions. There's no, there's no brain cell that is the cause of anger or fear. Right? It's a result of all sorts of experiences and memories and history. Now, I will say that I do sometimes, Natalia, feel a little frustration with the tendency in some Buddhist teachings and sometimes the way the Dharma is taught to minimize the importance of affect. Right? Often I will hear teachers say, it's just a feeling. And then we make all sorts of decisions based on our feelings. We do need to respect our feelings. Yeah, it's just we also need to notice if we're getting overly identified with them. Thank you, Natalia.
I think like kind of an associated question is, how do you know if you're in a state of spiritual bypass?
Yeah.
And I think it's sort of hard to actually recognize or.
Yeah. Can you hear the question online? Okay, and remind me your name.
And Jill.
Jill, thank you. So Jill was asking how do we know if we're in a state of spiritual bypass? Right, so maybe using the teachings to say, you don't have to feel this. Let it go, right? Aren't we supposed to let everything go? It's really only through our subjective experience that we can know. All right, because if there's some spiritual bypass around affect, probably we're going to be taking flight into the mind, wanting to think about things, rationalize things, dissociate. Right? It doesn't have the same experience as feeling directly what's there, but then using the mind to help hold it and to reflect more. It's a really different, both embodied and psychological experience. We all, of course, do some spiritual bypassing. Sometimes it's an excellent form of self-protection. But again, we can just try to notice, am I taking flight into the teachings instead of really grappling with something that's challenging? Yeah, thank you. Yeah, hi.
Yeah, I'm interested in your example of despair as different from fear. And I think a lot of people have experiences with despair, and I've looked to the teachings for answers on how to address it. And there's not much on despair specifically. So I'm curious about your take on its relationships with fear and maybe the Dharma teachings that could aid and address it.
Thank you. And remind me your name.
Oh, Caitlin.
Caitlin. So Caitlin was asking about despair and how it's different from fear, and are there teachings that might be helpful in working with despair? What is it? And I guess the first thing that comes to mind is I associate some experience of hopelessness with despair. Right. So unlike danger, which is really the main event with fear, with despair, there is a collapse that can happen into that sense of no longer having agency right? No longer having the possibility of working through a difficulty or getting more of what's needed. And so I would say it's a cousin to hopelessness and sometimes also to some depressed feeling. Right? There's usually also sadness layered in. So there are a couple of teachings that I think can be enormously helpful with despair. And the first one that comes to mind is the teaching of precious human life. Right, this is a teaching that we're always considering again and again on this path, and it's really a way of jump-starting our sense of possibility. Because it is easy. I mean, look at what we're dealing with in this world to feel some despair, right? I mean, you see all this regression, you see all these problems that we had every opportunity to work out, and then boom, they're here again, but worse. It's frustrating and depressing sometimes, and it can stir a lot of despair. Right? But the teaching of precious human life, it's basically a reset. Things might look pretty bad, but the truth is there is incredible inner capacity. We might be a little exhausted. We might need to recharge. There might be something we're needing to recharge, some community, some interaction with mentors. We might need some inspiration. But this life is the perfect life to work with these challenges. And it's said that the Buddha Shakyamuni put his toe on the earth when he was giving his first teaching, indicating this life, this place, this is the place for this work. Yeah, so precious human life. Also the paramita, the perfection of patience. Right, because again, we do go through so much that causes despair. And so sometimes we just need to be very patient with our suffering and other people's. But then stay curious to see if the suffering doesn't have to have the last word. Can we touch into it and then come out of it? And again and again. Thank you. Other questions, reflections? Yes,
Yeah, with regard to the practice of compassion, how do you know how much from others to take on? And should there be any regard for the self? In sort of holding space for others? Obviously, intellectually, I feel like that's a yes, but in terms of like the practice, I'm recalling, I don't know, maybe Shantideva was writing, but I'm recalling the story of some figure that sacrificed their body to feed hungry mother tiger, right? Like, is it not ideal to have regard for the self?
Yeah.
But how do you, obviously we're human and we have not achieved enlightenment, all of us,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah.
I haven't, I'll think of myself. I have not yet achieved enlightenment, and so
Right.
I need to survive,
Yeah.
but yeah, I'm just trying to find a way through that.
Yeah, thank you. And remind me your name.
Julandre.
Julandre, thank you. Yeah, so Julandre asked an excellent question about passion and regard for the self when we're opening, right, to the suffering of others. And I mean, should we regard the self when we're doing so? And the teachings seem to suggest that self-grasping is the root of all suffering, right? And there are all these examples of the great teachers who give everything. They give their body, right? They will hold on to no sense of separate well-being. And so what is the role of self-regard when we're trying to practice compassion? And I would suggest, Jalandre, this might be a lifelong, multi-life, depending on your belief system, discernment. How much can I open to somebody else's or a sea of suffering without getting yanked into it? Right, and I think we have to keep checking, because the idea is to be able to open to suffering without losing our own well-being. And that does take some work. I mean, I'm still walking past people who clearly are needing me to stop. It happens to me all the time. I'm sure I did it on the way here. I struggle with this sometimes. I have friends who do not. They just are not going to walk past any human being who shows any sign of being in distress. I'm not there yet. I don't like that. I don't like that in myself. But it's something that I think I'm just working with. There's some protective impulse in me around noticing how much do I have in my mind and in my heart to offer without getting really dysregulated, right? Without losing my own center of gravity.
Thinking of loved ones, which is why.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, even with loved ones, I mean, we've talked about this, right? Sometimes loved ones, I mean, often it's the loved ones who say, I'm sinking here, save me. And you want to be responsive, you want to be respectful, you want to recognize the suffering, but we still have to discern how to participate without causing harm to oneself. Yeah. Yeah, thank you.
We have a
I
question online. Oops.
Oh, sure.
Sorry, Pilar, to interrupt.
It's okay.
We just had a question online from Barb.
Okay, great. Thank you, Jalandre. Barb, hi.
Hi. Does the other person want to go first? Am I good? Was there a person there, a Pilar, that you wanted to pick? Are you okay? Okay. So I guess when the person asked about despair, there's someone in my field that recently attempted suicide. And so when you say precious human life, I guess I'm thinking, and then also I had a conversation with someone today, and I think my own attachment to life. So my own attachment to this, wanting this person to live, and yet recognizing we die. And I think it's my own fear of maybe looking at death, my own death, other people's death. So something, I guess I'm wanting you or asking you to say something about when you say precious human life, where does impermanence come in there, or life and death and that balance? Do you understand? I may be a little off topic, but anyway, that's what's coming up.
Thank you, Barb. No, it's a beautiful question because, of course, knowing how precious we all are does not mean that we aren't in an extremely fluid, dynamic system, right? In a body that has a relatively brief period of time on this earth, right? And of course, this is why it's important to really feel the preciousness of all life so that we don't coast too much. We don't take it for granted, right? because we all know the experience of coasting only to find suddenly this person isn't here. Or suddenly I realize I don't have as much time as I thought I had. And so they go together, right? I mean, the teaching of precious human life is not actually meant to be fodder for grasping, so much as it's meant to be inspiration to live out our Buddha nature. We have such a precious, fleeting opportunity, right? To really challenge whatever our struggles are so that we can be in this life with more patience and generosity and compassion. Yeah. Thank you, Barb.
Thank you.
Jane, were you about to ask something? No?
Chicken, you know.
Oh.
I was thinking, because I'm not, it's hard to talk about, but
Yeah.
I've had times in my life where I was suicidal and the despair was so bad that I couldn't feel the precious human life. I mean, I would say it to myself because I would rationally know it. Yeah, you had this precious human life, but it didn't feel precious.
Mhm.
It felt nothing but painful. I couldn't tap into that.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I mean, all the self-talk, all the meditation, all the teachings, nothing was getting through, you know. So, but on the other hand, you were talking about before, Sangha and community. What I always make sure to do is make plans with friends to see them. You know, at least a couple times a week, different people. So I don't want to be a burden on one person. I like to be around different friends, and that definitely helps. Like being here, I don't feel despair. I feel totally connected here. You know, and what was I gonna say? And I make sure to also pick up that phone and talk to my friends that I know they're in some trouble.
Yeah.
You know, I have one friend waiting for biopsy results to see if he has cancer. So I check in with him every day, see how he's doing, and you know,
Yeah.
another friend going through something that I get in touch with. So, I mean, that's all I'm able to do. But those things help.
Beautiful.
Hmm.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Jan was just with great generosity sharing the experience of times of despair, deep despair, and not being able to come back into connection with the feeling of precious human life. And I identify with that sense of just sometimes needing other people to reflect it, right? And so Jan has the brilliant plan, right, to reach out, to stay connected, not to just one person, and also to be available to others as a way of nurturing how precious we all are. Thank you. So, Sneh, you get the last word, and then we'll do a couple minutes of practice.
Thank you. Pilar, I just wanted to see if you could clarify. You know, you made a comment in the beginning, like we don't need someone to mentalize for us. What does that mean?
Yeah, so I was slipping in a little bit of clinical language, which, if I were to bring it back into the Dharma, you know, we're talking about the refuge prayer and needing to take refuge in the mind of a mentor. But that doesn't mean that we need the mentor to do the reflecting, the thinking for us, right? In the same way in therapy, we don't need the therapist to do the mentalizing, another clinical term for how we're using the mind to chew on our experience, to do that work for us. We need them to be with us in some way that jumpstarts our own capacity to reflect and to mentalize, which is basically to become aware that we have a mind that can process feelings, thoughts, memories, etc. And that's really what the optimal mentors do. They don't try to take over the healing for the student or the patient. They join you in a way that helps you nurture your own internal resources. Does that help, Snag? Great. Okay. So my friends, let's just in these last few minutes, we don't have much time, but just to sit together. So appreciating your presence and your questions. And since we've been thinking about and considering the role of fear, just taking a few moments to touch into the pulse of your breathing body. It's that place where you feel the breath. Could be the belly or the chest. Noticing what it's like to allow your awareness to start to settle into that area. Almost as if there was nothing you need to do but breathe. No problem to be solved. Nothing to be managed. Just one breath following the next. As you're breathing, feeling the rhythms of your breathing body. Mentally repeat the blessings of the four immeasurables, thinking, may I and all beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May I and all beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May I and all beings never be parted from a happiness beyond suffering. May I and all beings remain in equanimity, free from partiality, attachment, and aversion toward those near and far, for the benefit of all. you so much, everyone. Really appreciate your loving presence. Thank you, everybody online. So good to see you as always. And let's stay connected and stay connected with Shanti Deva. It's a beautiful place for those of you who can come here. You'll love it. And thanks for everyone who came out to be here.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you
Thank
so
you very
much. Thank
much.
you all. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you.
Here.
Hey,
Thank
everyone.
you, Sinead. Thank you.
night.
Good night. Thank you.
Bye.